Thank you. We'll start with prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from chapter 7, reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 7, the knowledge of the Absolute, text 7. Mattaha parataram na anyat Matta parataram nanyat kinchit asti dhananjaya kinchit asti dhananjaya mayi sarvam idam protam mayi sarvam idam protam sutre maniganaha Iva Sutre Manigana Iva Matta Parataram Nanyat Kinchid Asti Dhananjaya Mai Sarvam Idam Protam Sutre Manigana Iva Matta Parataram Nanyat Kinchid Asti Dhananjaya
Kinchidasti Dhananjaya
Mai Sarvam Idam Protam Sutre Manigana Iva Matta Parataram Nanyat Kinchid Asti Dhananjaya Mai Sarvam Idam Protam Sutre Manigana Iva
Mattah parataram nanyat Kinchidasti dhananjaya Mai sarvamidam protam Sutre manigana iva
Matta parataram nanyat Kinchidasti dhananjaya Mai sarvam idam protam Sutre manigana iva
Matta parataram nanyat Kinchidasti dhananjaya Mai sarvam Sarvavidam Sutre Maniganaya
Matta parataram nanyat
Kinchidasti Dhananjaya Mai sarvamidam protam Sutre Maniganaiva
Hare Krishna.
Matta parataram nanyat Kinchidasti dhananjaya Mai sarvam idam protam Sutre manigana iva
Matta parataram nanyat
Matta parataram nanyat
किञ्चित् अस्ति धनञ्जय
kinchid asti dhananjaya
मयि सर्वम् इदं प्रोतं
Mai sarvam idam protam
सूत्रे मणिगणा इव
Sutre manigana iva
मत्तं परन्तनं न्यायात्
Matta parataram nanyat
किञ्चित् अस्ति धनञ्जय
Kinchid asti dhananjaya
मयि सर्वम् इदं प्रोतं
Mai sarvam idam protam
सूत्रे मणिगणा इव
Sutre manigana iva Matta parataram nanyat Kinchid asti dhananjaya Mai sarvam idam protam Sutre manigana iva
Mattah parataram nanyat
Matta parataram nanyat
kinchit asti dhananjaya
Kinchid asti dhananjaya
mayi sarvam idam protam
Mai sarvam idam protam
sutre manigana iva.
Sutre manigana iva. Online, anyone wants to chant? Matta parataram nanyat
किञ्चिदस्ति धनञ्जय
Kinchid asti dhananjaya
मयि सर्वमिदं प्रोतं
Mai sarvam idam protam
सूत्रे मणिगणा
Sutre
इव
manigana iva Matta parataram nanyat Kinchid asti dhananjaya Mai sarvam idam protam Sutre manigana iva. Chandraprabhu Mataji. Matta parataram nanyat Kinchid asti dhananjaya Mai sarvam idam protam Sutre manigana iva. What to our meaning? Mattaha beyond myself. Parataram superior. Na not. Anyat anything else. Kinchit something. Asti there is. Dhananjaya O conqueror of wealth. Mai in me. Sarvam all that be. Idam which we see. Protam strung. Sutre on a thread. Maniganaha pearls. Iva likened. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada. Translation. O conqueror of wealth, Arjuna, there is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me, as pearls are strung on a thread. Translation with repetition. O conqueror of wealth, Arjuna, there is no truth superior to me. Everything rests upon me, as pearls are strung on a thread. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There is a common controversy over whether the supreme absolute truth is personal or impersonal. As far as Bhagavad Gita is concerned, the absolute truth is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and this is confirmed in every step. In this verse, in particular, it is stressed that the absolute truth is a person, that the personality of Godhead is the supreme absolute truth is also the confirmation of the Brahma Samhita. Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishnaha Satchidananda Vigraha. That is, the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead is Lord Krishna, who is the primeval Lord, the reservoir of all pleasure, Govinda, and the eternal form of complete bliss and knowledge. These authorities leave no doubt that the Absolute Truth is the Supreme Person, the cause of all causes. The impersonalist, however, argues on the strength of the Vedic version given in the Shvetasvatara Upanishad, Tato yat uttarataram tad arupam anamayam ya etat vidur amritas te bhavanti athetare dukkham evapi yanti. In the material world, Brahma, the primeval living entity within the universe, is understood to be the supreme amongst the demigods, human beings and lower animals. But beyond Brahma, there is a transcendence, who has no material form and is free from all material contaminations. Anyone who can know him also becomes transcendental, but those who do not know him suffer the miseries of the material world. The impersonalist puts more stress on the word arupam, but this arupam is not impersonal. It indicates the transcendental form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge as described in the Brahma Samhita quoted above. Other verses in the Shvetasvatara Upanishad substantiate this as follows. Vedaham etam purusham mahantam aditya varnam tamasa parastat tam eva vidvan amrita iha bhavanti nanyaha pantha vidyate ayanaya yasmat param na param asti kinchit yasman naniyo na jayo asti kinchit. I know that Supreme Personality of Godhead who is transcendental to all material conceptions of darkness. Only he who knows him can transcend the bonds of birth and death. There is no way for liberation other than this knowledge of that Supreme Person. There is no truth superior to that Supreme Person because he is the supermost. He is smaller than the smallest and he is greater than the greatest. He is situated as a silent tree and he illumines the transcendental sky. And as a tree spreads its roots, he spreads his extensive energies. From these verses, one concludes that the Supreme Absolute Truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is all-pervading by his multi-energies, both material and spiritual. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna devotees. So we are in the 7th chapter and the 7th verse. So easy to remember, 7.7. And this is one of the most important verses of Bhagavad Gita, for this is establishing the position of Lord Krishna. And just to revise, starting with 7th chapter, which is known as the knowledge of the Absolute. So in this chapter, as I also described earlier, the nature of Krishna consciousness is described completely. So the nature of Krishna consciousness means one has to understand the position of Lord Krishna. And as we have been seeing in the past 3 verses, there was description about Lord's external energy, Lord's marginal energy, and last verse there was explanation about the Lord himself, and there is further explanation about Lord in this verse. So as we saw, Bhumir Apo Analo Vayu Kham Mano Buddhi Revacha Ahankara Iti Amme Bhinna Prakriti Rashtata. So there are separated energies of the Lord. So these are my separated energies. That's what the Lord is saying. And therefore we saw how those energies are all have a source, and that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then we also saw that beyond these 8 separated material energies, there is aparayam itastu anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabhavo yayedam dharite jagat. So behind this inferior nature, which the 8 separated material energies are, there is a superior nature, superior energy of the Lord, and that is the living entities. And these living entities are struggling within the material nature. Then we saw in the yesterday's verse, Etad yonini bhutani sarvaniti upadharaya aham krishnasya jagataha prabhava pralayas tatha. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both its origin and dissolution. So in this verse, the Lord is establishing, although this is less known verse, but actually this is a so beautiful verse, for it is establishing the position of the Lord. The Lord is the source of everything, all that is material, all that is spiritual. And know for certain that I am both its origin and dissolution. So this is another very nice verse which is establishing the position of Lord Krishna. And here in this verse, today's verse, the Lord is reinforcing the same principle which is mentioned in the last verse, but further with an analogy and even making comparison that there is nothing much more superior than this knowledge or this principle, that the Supreme Absolute Truth is Supreme Lord Himself. So here, as we see, Mattaha, beyond myself. So as we see, this verse is being spoken by Lord Himself. So Lord Krishna Bhagavan Uvacha. So the Lord Himself is speaking this verse to Arjuna, and therefore He is addressing Arjuna as Dhananjaya, O conqueror of wealth. So Lord Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and He is saying, beyond myself, Parataram Nanyat, there is nothing superior beyond me. So this is very nicely translated by Srila Prabhupada, that there is no truth superior to me. And then again, you can see the word Mai, in me, Sarvam Idam. So everything rests upon me. So all that we see, that has been described even in the past verses, Lord is saying that everything rests upon me. Protam sutre maniganaiva. So just like as pearls are strung on a thread. So this is a very beautiful verse, although the translation seems like one line, but in fact this verse is treasure for both philosophers and theologians, for this is talking about the most central aspect. The one of the central aspect in philosophy, or in fact in any branch of knowledge, is to understand truth. So if you deeply dig into any branch of knowledge, the most fundamental truth is the most important one. And to understand no truth superior than that means it must be the very, very high branch of knowledge that actually talks about the highest truth. So usually in this world, when we study subjects, they all provide a certain kinds of truth, not really the real truth, as we will see what the real truth, as Lord Krishna explains in the earlier verses, in the earlier chapters. So in fact, one of the characteristics of knowledge is that it must be true and it must be useful. So when we study so many knowledge, either they are not really true and neither they are really useful. But as we see, the knowledge that we get from the Vedic literature is both true and completely useful. So here, so let us try to understand a little more about the word truth. So there is no truth superior to me. So as we see in Bhagavad Gita verse 2.16, which is actually even to define the word truth is very, very difficult. If you come across any other great philosopher or any other person from any other religion, if you just ask them what is truth, they will struggle. Because it is very difficult to define the most fundamental terms of existence and the nature of existence. And one of the aspects that comes here is that is the nature of truth. And as we see, the verse 2.16 says, Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. Ubhayorapi drishta antas, tva anyos tattva darshibihi. So, as we will also maybe pay a little more attention, the word truth in Sanskrit can be defined in different ways, or different terms have been used to describe the word truth, or sometimes the absolute truth. So one is tattva and paratattva. So sometimes truth and absolute truth, paratattva. Or sometimes the word vastu and paravastu. So the vastu is substance and or the supreme truth, absolute truth. Similarly, satyam, param satyam. So like this, there have been various words that have been used. Sat, asat. Sat refers to absolute truth or truth. Asat refers to relative truth, or which is not actually true. So in this verse, it is being said, na asataha vidyate bhavaha. So that which is not true, na asataha. Asataha means that which is not true, or that which is not really existing. And what is the nature of that is which is not true? It does not have endurance. That means if something is not really true, it cannot sustain the phases of time. That means it cannot last, it cannot endure. It will vanquish. It will just appear for a certain moment of time and it just vanquishes. So Prabhupada gives the example of clouds. So in comparison to an ocean, the clouds remain for some amount of time and they vanquish. So in that sense, the clouds do not really endure the duration of time. They don't really last. And therefore, they are called as asat, or that which is not really true, because it doesn't really last. On the other hand, one can say that the ocean is really true because it lasts. So similarly, the example of body and the soul is given, that the body does not last, whereas the soul lasts. So similarly, there are various examples that are provided to understand what is actually true, what is that actually endures, what is that actually exists. So what that is true must endure, must exist. And nabhavo vidyate sataha. And the nature of sataha, or of that which is true or eternal, the nature of that is, there is no cessation to it. One cannot stop what is true. By nature, it is such that it can never be ceased. There is no cessation to it. And this seers have concluded by studying the nature of both. So this is a very important principle, that the Vedic literatures are helping us to guide, to discern between what is absolutely true and what is relatively true, or to distinguish reality from illusion. As we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, dharma projita kaitavo atra parmo nirmatsaram satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shavadam tapatraya unmulanam. So the vastu there, that refers to reality, that which is true, which is substantial. As we also saw in the last Bhagavad Gita quote, the what do we call this? YouTube video shorts, YouTube shorts. So the description was given of what is substantial and what is a shadow of reality. So the material world is like a shadow of reality. But the reality, as the mirage example was given, there is water, appearance of water, but the real substantial water is somewhere else. Similarly, the real substantial thing from the shadow, when we see shadow, we have to recognize that there is somewhere else which is really true, which is real substance. And yes, so I was talking about vastu. Yes, so real substance. So this ability to distinguish between truth and illusion. So this is what the Vedic philosophy is all trying to explain us. So this idea of what is really true, what is illusion, and how do we distinguish between these two things, that is the primary knowledge that is provided in the Vedic literatures. And then based upon this knowledge, how should we act? And when we act based on this knowledge, what perfection can we attain and how can we attain? And what is that perfection? So these are the basic instructions that the Vedic knowledge tries to teach us. So another word that is commonly used, Prabhupada commonly uses, as also we see in this chapter, the knowledge of the absolute. So there is something known as absolute truth and there is something known as relative truth. So relative truth is that which depends upon another truth. So the truth of that cannot be validated or established on its own. There has to be another some truth upon which this is based. Whereas absolute truth has absolute, means there is no dependence upon anything. So it is completely independent, and therefore, as we also see in Srimad Bhagavatam first verse, Janmadi asya yatha anvayad itaratascha ardeshu abhigna swarat. The word swarat refers to completely independent. So that absolute truth, which is defined as Janmadi asya yatha, which is a source of all energies, or which is a source of creation, destruction, and maintenance. So that source is completely independent. There is no other truth which is required to establish that truth, but that truth is independently true always. Whereas one example of relative truth is that when someone says a child exists, in order to establish that child exists, that also necessarily depends on that their parents exist. So there is another truth because of which this truth is coming into picture. Or in other words, if I have to see that this bulb is blue, yellow, whatever color it is, or if I want to see that this camera is black color, then I need a source called light, and then my eyes have to be in a proper shape. If I wear a different glasses, then the truth what appears to me could be blue, black, or any other color. So there is also a factor which is governing what this truth is. Therefore, in this material world, any truth that we are understanding is based upon some relative factors. It is not an absolute truth. It's not an absolute factor that it is always true. In some other condition, in another some circumstances, this may change. And therefore, this is also called as relative truth. So the knowledge that we acquire, Jada Vidya or Maya Vaibhava, because it does not talk about anything which is substantial. That's why the Acharyas say, simply studying this Jada Vidya does not solve the problems of life. It does not contain substantial value. It does not contain substantial truth. And therefore, it is required that one should go beyond this mundane knowledge. And that is what these texts are providing us with. Now, it is very interesting that Lord himself has to state that what is that is the highest truth. Now, sometimes people may say, if Prabhupada gives this example, that if I say I'm great, I'm the greatest, people will become very angry and say, oh Swamiji, why are you saying you're the greatest? Or people may become envious that how can Swamiji say that he is the greatest? But Prabhupada says that is not the case with the Supreme Lord, because there is no other way one can ever understand who the Supreme Lord or who is the Supreme Absolute Truth without Supreme Absolute Truth revealing it. So sometimes people struggle that, oh, I'm not able to understand the Supreme Lord. I'm not able to understand. And therefore, there is also this another beautiful verse in Srimad Bhagavatam which says, Athapi te deva padambuja dvaya prasada leshanugrihita eva hi janati tattvam bhagavan mahimmo nachanya eko api chiram vichinvan. So, only if one is favored by the Lord, even a slight trace of the mercy of your lotus feet, he can understand the greatness of your personality. But those who speculate to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead are unable to know you, even though they continue to study the Vedas for many years. So, the nature of the Absolute Truth, the nature of the Supreme Truth, cannot be understood by speculation, cannot be understood by any amount of research. This knowledge only by prasada lesha anugrahita, only by the mercy, even a tinge, lesha, little, very slight mercy of the Lord. Without that, this knowledge cannot be understood. One may be thinking very critically, logically, just like we were doing book distribution today. We met some Christian, and he said, I can logically understand what Christ said. I can understand historically what Christ said. But none of these things help us to understand the real truth. They only may give us some ideas here and there. But to understand real truth, we need the mercy of the Lord. We need the external manifestation of Paramatma as a spiritual master to understand this truth. Without that mercy, it is not possible to venture into truths, especially the truth, the Supreme Absolute Truth. And similarly, as Prabhupada also mentions, that the purpose of religion cannot be understood unless it is understood from the lens of Mahajanas. Unless we don't take shelter of Mahajanas and understand what they are saying, we cannot understand the purpose of religion, because it is very, very guhyatamam, very confidential. And therefore, it is important that one must recognize that this knowledge which Lord is providing here can be only understood when we hear from Him or from His pure representative. And this knowledge, as being provided here, is the mercy of the Lord. Otherwise, this knowledge is very difficult to understand. For example, when we see everything around us, how do we understand what is the source of everything? Prabhupada says that everyone is interested to understand the origin of everything. Where is the source that is of the stars, the planets, the people, everything? What is the source of that? So, Prabhupada says it is a natural inclination of a philosophical mind to question this. But even if we understand, try to see carefully what is happening, what is happening, what is happening, where is it everything coming from, what is that is actually true, it is so difficult. Because we are so limited in our scope of understanding. And therefore, people start to speculate in different ways. Sometimes people speculate in the name of scientific theories, sometimes in the name of philosophy. In different ways, people may speculate. It is also, as it is said in Brahma Samhita, Panthastu koti satavatsara sampragamyo vayo rathapi manaso munipangvanam. So even if one can travel the speed of wind or mind, to understand the absolute truth, it's very, very difficult. The only way to receive this is when Lord has to speak this knowledge. Lord has to transmit this knowledge in Parampara system, or Lord Himself has to speak this. And therefore, this verse is so important. So there are two kinds of people. One class of people known as realist, and another class of people known as anti-realist. Realist means who consider that there is something which is true and which can be understood as true. But there is another class of people who think there is nothing which is true. The truth is in my mind, or truth is illusion. So some people even do not come to the understanding that there is something which is true. They think there is nothing which is true. Only it's my mind. And therefore, they do not give any value to anything. And there are very few people who think that there is something which is true. And even who knows that there is something which is true, they speculate what is the ultimate truth. They speculate, some people speculate as energy, some people speculate as something else. Some people may say that this is beyond material energy, some transcendence, impersonal form, as Prabhupada is giving the example of Shvetashvatara Upanishad, as how impersonalists consider that although there is some truth, but that truth is arupam, which is not having any form. But amongst them, even beyond them, there are very few, there are another class of people who understand that the supreme absolute truth, there is real truth, there is real supreme absolute truth, and that supreme absolute truth is actually a person. And that actually person is actually Krishna. So this is very, very rare knowledge. It's a very, very treasured knowledge. In another place in Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says that someone who knows the Vedic knowledge can be considered to be great. But amongst them, one who can explain this knowledge and convince others, he is to be greater. One who can not only convince others, but is also applying this principle, he is even more greater. But one who has developed pure devotion after understanding all of this and applying, he is the greatest. So this knowledge is very, very rare. And to find someone who has got that pure devotion, Prabhupada, who could convince anyone with this knowledge, who has applied completely into this knowledge. Because without having a person who has done all these things, it is very difficult for anyone to follow this, anyone to comprehend this, anyone to have faith that there is something which is supreme truth, and someone knows it, and someone can help us understand that. So, Prabhupada in other places also says that this verse is, anyone who understands, is like he can defeat any philosophers. So, or he is greater philosopher than any other mundane philosopher. Because to reach to this conclusion is very, very difficult. So your Lord himself is saying that there is no superior truth to me. And this is further confirmed as we see in Bhagavad Gita also, in other places, aham hi adir devanam. So there are so many demigods. Chief demigods Vishnu, Brahma and Shiva, but they all are nothing but expansions of the Lord. Vishnu and Narayana are nothing but the expansion of the Lord, Krishna. And Prabhupada gives the example of, from quoting from Brahma Samhita, that as there are different candles, the Vishnu Tattvas can be considered to be of similar kind of candles. But there is one candle which is lighting the other candles. And that original personality of Godhead, Swayam Rupaha, or as we see Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam. So that original form, that original Lord is Sri Krishna. And all the acharyas of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Prabhupada also quotes Jiva Goswami as how he establishes Tattva Sandarbha and Krishna Sandarbha, where he elaborately quotes from various places to establish how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is a very unique contribution that without this amalgamation of knowledge from all the Vedic literatures by the Goswamis and then previous acharyas and then Srila Prabhupada providing us in this form, it is not possible for a mundane person to come to this conclusion. And therefore, Prabhupada gives various examples to establish. Prabhupada always, in the purport also, Prabhupada is quoting from Brahma Samhita, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishnaha. So there are, although there are so many controllers, Ishvara means controllers. So there can be multiple gods, people may say, but there is one Paramaha. There is one Supreme God. We can also control to some extent some things. The demigods also can control some things to some extent. But who is that Supreme Personality of Godhead? So that is being explained in various places in the Shastras. And Advaitam, Achyutam, Anadim, Ananta Rupam, Adyam, Purana Purusham, Navayovanam Cha. So Advaitam, so he is only one, he is not many. He is one Supreme Personality of Godhead. So to understand this truth is a very rare gift, and only by the mercy, as we see, of Srila Prabhupada, that we are able to understand. Otherwise, people may interpret this in multiple different ways, and no one can ever reach into a proper conclusion. So, having said that, so Prabhupada is also quoting here from Shvetasvatara Upanishad, and Prabhupada is highlighting one word. So Prabhupada is quoting this verse and he's saying, in the material world, Brahma, the primeval living entity within the universe, is understood to be the supreme amongst the demigods, human beings and lower animals. But beyond Brahma, there is the transcendence, who has no material form and is free from all material contaminations. Anyone who can know him also becomes transcendental, but those who do not know him suffer the miseries of the material world. So Prabhupada is then explaining that the impersonalist puts more stress on the word arupam. But this arupam is not impersonal. It indicates the transcendental form of eternity, bliss and knowledge as described in the Brahma Samhita quoted above. So again, when people translate books, so-called scholars, they try to use the literally meaning. So basically one word can have multiple meanings. But it is also very important to understand the context in which the words are being used. In the greater context of the book, in the greater context of what is actually happening, what is being said, one has to give a meaning to the word. And here, as impersonalists, in a certain direct way, they think that there is nothing, there is no form, there is no legs, there is no hands, or any sort of explanation they give when they see the word arupam or nirakar. So they tend to give a certain meaning. But here Prabhupada is explaining how this word is to be understood. This means that Lord does not have any material form. Lord, who is beyond this material world, who existed before the creation, and after the dissolution also he remains. And this is accepted by actually even by Mayavadis, that there is the Lord who is always existing, Narayana. And here it is being said that that Lord is not the one who is existing beyond this material creation. As we also saw in the last verse, we saw the verse which says Prabhava and Pralayas. So from the beginning in the dissolution. So the Lord who is source of both of this, he is transcendental. He is not having these qualities of matter. So this is another very important point to note, that whenever we hear Mayavadis say this thing, they twist the meanings of the words. This is called as word jugglery. So when we hear some people, we must be very careful. What is the meaning of the word? Why are they saying so and so? But they twist the words in a specific way and confuse the people. And then another important point Prabhupada is bringing, that other verses in the Svedashvatara Upanishad substantiate this as follows. So Prabhupada is again quoting from the same Upanishad to establish that the Lord has form. This is another important point that one can see, that when Mayavadis quote from certain Upanishad, it is very interesting that they only choose a specific verse or a specific phrase. But actually, if one reads the entire Upanishad, there will be also other places where there is description of the personal form of the God. But they do not explain that, or they do not talk that. But here Prabhupada is beautifully bringing here, where Prabhupada is explaining the verse, I know that Supreme Personality of Godhead who is transcendental to all material conceptions of darkness. Only he who knows him can transcend the bonds of birth and death. There is no way for liberation other than this knowledge of that Supreme Person. So here Prabhupada is explaining that in this verse, the description of the Supreme Lord as being different, transcendental to all material conceptions of darkness. So there is a certain conception of material world that we impose on the Supreme Lord. But that is not true. He is beyond all this conception, material conceptions. And only one who can understand the Supreme Lord, as we also see Janma Karma Chame Divyam. So only one who understands the nature of the Supreme Lord, he can escape and transcend the bonds of birth and death. There is no way for liberation other than this knowledge of that Supreme Person. This is another reason why Srila Prabhupada wanted a lot of propaganda to happen. So Prabhupada used to say, you should do Krishna propaganda. It is like the material world is in some way or the other, either they propose Mayavada, Shunyavada, or some other form. And they're all in different ways. Someone is doing propaganda of science, some communism, some socialism, some Americanism, some thatism. So in this world where people are doing different kinds of propaganda, thinking, some people think what they are doing is good. Some people are doing so that they can exploit others. But this knowledge, which Srila Prabhupada is providing us, is the one that can help transcend the bonds of birth and death. And there is no way for liberation other than this knowledge of that Supreme Person. So only by acquiring this knowledge of that Supreme Person, one can actually find freedom from all struggles of life. And therefore, how precious is this knowledge? And therefore, Prabhupada also wanted all of us to acquire this knowledge very well and share this knowledge. And as we also see in Bhagavad Gita in the end, where Lord says, one who shares this knowledge with others is most dear to me. So in the end, Prabhupada is saying, from these verses, one concludes that the Supreme Absolute Truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is all-pervading by his multi-energies, both material and spiritual. So, as also it is said in, I think, Puranas, that how fire, although being in one place, can light up, the different energies can go far off. Similarly, the Lord who is present in the spiritual world, by his multifarious energies, he maintains, creates, and dissolutes all these universes. And therefore, it is also said here, everything rests upon him. So, so as we will also see in the later verse of 9th chapter, where in the verse 9.4, it is mentioned, Maya datam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina matsani sarva bhutani na chaham tesho avastitaha. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. all beings are in me, but I am not in them. So, the Lord is mentioning here that in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. Just like in Brahma Samhita also it is said, Andantarastam Paramanu Chayantara. So, the Lord is present in even every atom, in every, all pervading. He is all pervading, He is existing everywhere, but we are not able to see. So here, it is also important to note that the Lord is also present within our heart. He is present everywhere, but because one of the reason is that unless we don't develop the, as we were discussing earlier morning also, premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena. So unless one does not have developed this ointment, the eyes to see the Lord, one is not able to see it. But when one develops the eyes to see, the pure devotees, they can see the presence of the Lord everywhere. And as we also saw in the previous two verses, how these different energies of the Lord, the material existence and the living entities, are nothing but the energy of the Lord. And therefore, it is important to note that when we also see the energies of the Lord, it is actually the unmanifested, or the energies are not independent of the Lord. They are also coming from the Lord. That is another important point. Everything rests upon me. And then we see that when we try to see that everything rests upon Him, but we are not able to see Him, therefore we may mistake that He is not there. So even so-called big scientists, they only see the material energy. And they think that only this material energy or some form of energy is only the cause of this entire existence. But they forget to see that there is something behind which is holding it up, which is bringing together everything so nicely. So they cannot see that. And therefore, even if you look at great scientists like Stephen Hawking, when they write books, they consider this material nature to be great. They attribute the greatness of this existence to material nature. And therefore, the Lord is using a wonderful example here to state that Sutre Maniganaiva Protam. So just like as pearls are strung on a thread, although we can see the pearls, we can see different living entities, we can see different energies, the pearls of this material manifestation. But the thread that is joining all these things is very, very difficult to identify. It's not perceivable. But it is so tightly knit. If that thread is not there, the pearls do not exist. Similarly, if that Supreme Lord is not present, we cannot make sense of this world in completeness. And therefore, even if you carefully look, any philosopher or any scientist, if you question carefully, what is much more deeper than what you are saying? What is much more deeper than? So Prabhupada often, when he spoke with scientists or when devotees used to ask him questions, Prabhupada would say that scientists say that there is, in the beginning there is chunk. But then Prabhupada would laugh and say, where did the chunk come from? So Prabhupada would question them. So what is the most fundamental? Because unless the most fundamental of understanding God or the Supreme Lord Krishna is not put in, we cannot connect everything very clearly. And therefore, this example that as pearls are strung on a thread, so that thread to see requires great intelligence and mercy of the Lord and the Acharyas, Srila Prabhupada. So, and in that sense, this is a beautiful verse which is establishing the position of the Lord. Otherwise, people worship many demigods, people worship impersonalism, people worship some other forms of things to be the absolute truth or the higher truth. But here it is very clear that the Lord Sri Krishna himself is stating in this verse that there is no truth superior to me. And as Prabhupada also says, that one who accepts Bhagavad Gita in the disciplic succession, as Arjuna understood, by stating that yes, whatever you have said is true. So when we hear in that mood to accept things as mentioned in Gita, then we can also achieve the highest perfection. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
So in that verse that you quoted, nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sato, and you told that soul is eternal.
Yes.
Or that which doesn't have cessation is eternal.
Yes.
But that which doesn't have cessation, how do we know that it is soul?
So, as Lord Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, that so one way we can understand things is by observation. So, one of the things that we can observe, Dehino asmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam chara. So, when we observe things around us, the things are constantly changing. They are not remaining the same. They are not enduring the phases of time. But in our own life, we can see that the one who is identifying with oneself, the individual living being who is different from this matter, is remaining same. And therefore, in what we can perceive is that the living entity is the same despite changing the body, despite the world being changing. Even though everything else is changing, it is remaining same. And then further, Lord is also mentioning the different qualities of the soul. And as we see in the very soon, Lord also says, na hanyate hanyamane sharire. So the nature of the soul is being further described. So one is from our observation that we can understand, but then we also need to depend upon the instruction from the Vedic literatures to support that it is actually, that also remains beyond our observation of in this life.
So in this verse, the size of the soul is minuscule, right? Which is existing in all human beings. But the supreme soul, the Parama, the absolute truth, how can we attribute which is present in all of us, right? It should be also a bigger size more than us. That's how normally we attribute when relate it. And even if the soul is of that dimension, right? How can we attribute it is Purushaha also? When we attribute, right? How can you connect it is? How can we say that it is Purusha also?
The living entity,
the supreme soul.
How you can say the supreme soul is Purusha?
Purusha also. As a second question,
what's the first question? So
soul is a minuscule size, right?
Yes.
And the supreme soul, supreme is an absolute truth, should be of that dimension or a higher dimension.
In comparison to soul?
In comparison to soul.
Okay.
So my question is how can we relate that the supreme is, normally we relate, right, father, mother, child kind of relationship. We see that that a soul and the supreme soul is of the same nature or having the same properties. But soul is soul is a sukshma size. And we supreme soul, Paramatma, is of also the same dimension or same size or bigger size, or is it the, how can we say that it is on the is it the bigger size, or is a human form, or in the same manalage unnada?
Okay.
Paramatma kuda human form lo undi bigger size, having having the same structure, having the same personality.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and if that is the case, then how can Paramatma is why Purusha only?
Why Purusha?
Purusha.
Okay.
Sorry, it may be a layman question.
Okay. Okay, one second. Okay. So, anyway, so as you rightly said, the the size of the living entity is very, very tiny, 100,000th part of the tip of the hair, or 10,000th part of the 100,000. So one important thing to notice is that the nature of the living entity and the nature of the Lord is of two different categories. Qualitatively, there is oneness, that the living entity is Satchitananda, the Supreme Lord is also Satchitananda Vigraha. So in that sense, there is a similarity. But as we also see, the Anu and Vibhu, the Lord is extremely great. The living entity is very, very tiny. Lord. So as we can see, there is another aspect which is also important to note, is that there is an inconceivable nature of the Supreme Lord. We cannot conceive everything of Him in totality. So as we also say, when we describe the glories or the qualities of Lord, we cannot describe all the qualities. We cannot describe everything in totality. Neither we can know everything in totality. But at the same time, we can appreciate that how great He is. So by His inconceivable potency, the Lord can manifest as Paramatma in all the atoms. And to my understanding, the Lord is having 400 form as Paramatma, but what size is the tip? The size of a thumb is what? So there is description of the size of the Lord as equivalent to a thumb, but the Lord is also present everywhere. So it may not be very easy for us to conceive that how is the Lord having a certain form, size, and also is present everywhere. But we must understand that that the nature of the Lord, of His diverse energies, just like the small soul is able to perform so many things within this body, but the Supreme Lord, so through His diverse energies, so I'm not very sure if just by the size we can say that the Lord is great or Purusha, but it is by constitution that the Lord is Purusha. So by size also the Lord is greater and greatest, in fact, there is no one equal to Him. But by nature, by constitution, the living entity is always dependent upon the Lord. Whereas the Lord is always independent. He is not dependent upon any other source. His existence is beyond this material. Although the Lord as Paramatma is present in this material world, He is not influenced by any of this material nature. So I don't know if I explained everything clearly, but my basic point is that the Lord by nature is Purusha. He's not, the living entity cannot be ever Purusha by nature, by constitution.
Srinivas, the first thing that Paramatma is only present in material world. Is not there in the spiritual world. So the Lord is present in our body along with the soul. That is why we are able to function. And the Lord as super soul also transmigrates along with the soul to another body. He continues the journey and He is waiting for us to turn towards Him. Super souls, there is no need for super soul in the spiritual world because you are in your spiritual body. And as far as the size is concerned, as he was mentioning, the Supreme Absolute Truth is smaller than the smallest and bigger than the biggest. Now for our material mind to conceive that is not easy. But all the contradictions simultaneously exist in the Lord. Perfectly, there is no problem. He can become the smaller than the smallest. The Lord, when He was present in, when Uttara's Aswathama was trying to kill Parikshit, He was present outside when Uttara came running. And He also entered into the womb of mother and protected from the Brahmastra. Simultaneously He can do that. Because that is why He is Lord. He is the supreme inconceivable person. And as far as Purusha and Prakriti is concerned, the thing to understand is, it's not like the materialistic understanding is like I am a male, so I am Purusha. Somebody is female, so she is Prakriti. But as per the Vedic scriptures, all of us, irrespective of what bodies we have got, we are all prakritis. Why? Because we are meant to serve the Lord. So energy and energetic. So energy comes from the energetic. We are all energies of the Lord. Hence we are prakriti, irrespective of what body we have got, what dress we are wearing, that is irrespective of that. All of us, we are meant to serve. So that is why we are prakriti and he is Adi Purusha.
Yes, please come in. You can come in. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, can I request everyone to come online in front of the camera? Chant Hare Krishna mantra once. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hare Hare. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.